All right, good morning, everybody. Ned's back, yay. I am Debbie Rosen. We're just waiting for everyone to log in. I see the ticker moving up. It's always nice to see everybody in the chat. So if you can hear us okay, please say good morning.
Good morning.
And I know that we have people from all over the place. Hi, Veronica. She's always one of the first. Thank you. We have people from all over the globe today.
Wow.
I was excited. Thank you, Shannon. Oh, Jen's back, yay. I always say my two supporters, best supporters there. And it's great to see everybody. I always know this time I got smart enough and made sure that I was clear about time zone. It used to be we never had to worry about that, which is good news. So it means we have further reach, especially for you guys who have been all over the globe. Well, thank you for saying that says I love Dr. Stixrud's background. And I do too. I've been lucky enough, as we're chatting here till 9 a.m., lucky enough to participate in both businesses, that Ned and Dr. Stixrud, Mr. Johnson, Ned, I don't know what to call you guys now, so I'll call you Ned and Bill, have founded, and really appreciated being able to participate in that. So I think it's 9 o'clock. I know that people are still, thank you, Kelly. We're looking forward to having you. Oh, good morning from Niagara Falls, New York. That's awesome. So it's 9 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who are new to us, I don't think everybody's frozen. Leah, you might just have to restart or refresh your screen. I don't feel. Ned and Bill, are you okay?
Yeah, we're good.
So, okay, great. So I am Debbie Rosen. I'm the founder and owner of the Study Pro, and with my business partner, Lindsay Toms, who is not on this webinar today, but we are an executive function and study skills center. And so what that means is that we help students with the process of school. And one of the missions that we have is to bring information to parents on topics that are of really importance to them. And this is the kind of thing that's of great importance to me as a mother of two, and I know you each have two as well. As a mother of two, it is really critical for me to consistently step back and think about how am I being the best parent that I can be? How can I reduce my stress and therefore be a better parent and show up for my children? And the one thing I'll just say is that about the Study Pro is that we do provide courses for time management, organization, how to break work down, how to take notes, take tests. We're trying to reduce anxiety in families. We also have great homework center, which I'm sitting in, and also do one-to-one coaching. So we're happy to be both here in person as well as remote. So if you have any questions on any of this, most of you know how to reach us, info@thestudypro.com. And with that, I'd like to introduce two exceptional gentlemen, both who have spoken here before, and we're very grateful for them to come back. Ned Johnson is a father of two. We do like to lead with our personal lives and our families and the things that are the most important of us. But not only that, he's an author and speaker. This is his third book, which I will say that I am in about 3/4 of the way through. I'm not quite through. But this is the third book. Of course, he co-authored with Dr. Stixrud, The Self-Driven Child, but he also previously wrote a book on conquering the SAT. And Dr. Stixrud also is a father of two and grandfather of four. Is that right?
Correct.
And also shares a much deeper, but also my love of transcendental meditation, which you could talk to him about maybe in the chat at the end of the question Q&A. But also, obviously, the author of, co-author of What Do You Say, along with Ned. And they also, of course, wrote the New York Times bestselling book, The Self-Driven Child. So what I'm so excited about today is multiple things. One is that we're always, as parents, trying to figure out what to do and say. And of course, that's exactly what this book is about. And we're also looking for ways of creating deeper strategies with our children. and finding ways to be more empathetic and care about sometimes things that they say that maybe we don't care about, or we don't react as well, or maybe we're not even understanding their own emotion. So how is that, how can we better address that? And I know that's a lot of what you will talk about today. So to answer a question, yes, this is being recorded. Yes, you will get the replay. That is what we do each time we host these. And then the last thing is that I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off. So 50 minutes of presentation and 10 minutes of Q&A, and I'll come back for the Q&A so I can help moderate that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, gentlemen. Thank you again and welcome.
Thanks so much for having us, Debbie. It's wonderful to be here. So it's certainly, given this pandemic and everything, this may be the most challenging time to raise children, although it's never been easy. About 35 years ago, I tested a kid whose mother was a humorist, and she said, we really shouldn't call it raising children. We should call it lowering parents, because it's just hard. It could be humbling and humiliating at times. And so Ned and I wrote our first book, The Self-Driven Child. It came out in 2018. And about a year later, our agent said, you really should think about a second book. And people love the dialogues in The Self-Driven Child. The phrases like, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And the dialogues where you illustrate how you talk with your own kids, how you talk to the kids you see in your practices. And he said, give us a book which is more of that. Just make it easier for parents to do what you recommend in The Self-Driven Child. And then I thought about it. Well, we could probably do this. I mean, we've been talking with kids one-on-one between the two of us for about 65 years. And also, we just continue to see so many parents who say, I keep trying to get him to see, or I've told him a million times, or I've taken away everything. I don't know what to do. And we're thinking, okay, we probably know some tools that would be helpful. And in The Self-Driven Child, the main thesis of the book is that one of the most important things we can do for kids is to help them develop a healthy sense of control over their own lives, in part because the sense of control is hugely related to mental health and is foundational for self-motivation. And it turns out that kids, every year they're in school, their sense of control goes down. And so we thought, and let's work on that. Let's work on promoting that sense of autonomy. This is your life. This is your problem. You get to solve it with my help, that kind of idea. And when we started to think about writing a book about communicating with kids, we thought really the fundamental purpose of communicating is building relationship. And we knew that a close relationship with a parent is about as close as you can get to a silver bullet for protecting kids against the harmful effects of stress. And so we figured, and certainly, as many of you know, kids in affluent communities who go to high achieving schools are at higher risk for anxiety disorders and depression and substance use disorders, and part because on average they don't feel as close to their parents as more middle class kids do. So the challenge is how do we build that close connection? That's where we wanted to start, and we knew that we did these focus groups with children and adolescents as we were writing the book. And one of the questions we asked them is, who do you feel closest to in this world? And sometimes it was a parent, often it was a parent, but often it was as a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt or a cousin or an older friend or a teacher or a counselor. And we said, what is it about that person that makes you feel close to them? And the kids invariably said something on the order of, they listen to me without judging me, and they don't tell me what to do. And we thought, well, this makes sense because we know that two of the most important tools for building a close connection with kids are empathy and validation. And it's not intuitive. Oftentimes, it's not easy, but it's really worth it. Ned, take over to talk about this empathy and validation piece.
I mean, in addition, part of the reason that closeness is also so important, apart from just we love our kids and want to be close to them, is that we want kids, when things aren't going well, to come to us. I mean, so often, both of us, especially with doing test prep, say, kids will get really upset and say, oh my gosh, well, don't tell my mom, don't tell my dad. And instead of running to the people who love them and know them most by the way, because, they haven't felt safe enough yet with these hard feelings. The other thing is that it's the reason we talk about empathy and validation in the first chapter of the book is that it's not logic that calms hard emotions. It's feeling understood. And when we really work hard to show kids, we're trying to understand their perspective, that we're empathizing with where they're coming from, even if we don't agree with it, that we show them we're seeking to understand. We also show that we can handle their hard feelings. So one of the tools that we really like is something called wigging, which the kind of most foundational tool in psychology is reflective listening. And wigging, we borrowed this from a guy named Ron McGinn, stands for what I got is. And it's a tool just to repeat back to someone what you think you've heard as much as you can, that allows them to feel that you're working hard to understand. So, you know, if you have a kid, and for many people on this call, you have kids where school isn't always perfect and grades don't always come back the way you want. So, you know, if your kid comes, I did terribly on the test, it's just so unfair. I mean, I studied like crazy. Mr. Johnson put things on there. I didn't even say it was going to be on there. And you're sitting there being like, really studied? Buddy, I watched you like 4 hours on your phone. Are you kidding me? Or we say, oh, that, you know, that you take the teacher's side. Now, wait a second. Mr. Johnson's the most straightforward guy in the world. That's just not even possible. Or we try to talk them out of those hard feelings. Like, oh my gosh, kiddo, it's one test. It's not the end of the world. There'll be other ones. All of which is true. But it feels a little invalidating. So what this would look like to establish empathy and validation with this wigging tool would be, okay, wow, that's a lot. I can see how you're so upset. Can I repeat back to make sure I understood? So what you feel is that you felt like you studied really hard for this test and it just went terribly and you're really upset about that. Is that about right? That's exactly it. Now, note, I didn't agree with the facts. I simply said, you feel like you studied really hard and you feel that it didn't go so well and and as a result, you're upset. But it's this, again, this empathy and validation that calms hard emotions. And for all of you who know as much as probably I do about executive functions, we know that when people are spun up, that those executive functions go completely offline. And it's with these tools that we can calm kids' minds and put them in a position where they can often solve things for themselves and put things into perspective. So there's a story in our book. Bill and I were out in California, Palo Alto, giving a talk pre-COVID about the self-driven child. And the sponsor of this event passed on to us an email that she'd received that night. And this parent had watched the talk and came home to find her 7th grade son just in tears. Mom, I'm the weakest boy in all of 7th grade, and he's just so upset. And she said, well, gosh, you know, normally I would have said, oh, sweetheart, that can't possibly be true. Or you have so many other gifts. I mean, you're good at this and you're good at that. Or I would have jumped into problem solving. Well, I'll talk to your coach. We'll get a personal trainer. We'll figure this out. But I resisted my natural inclinations to want to, you know, problem solve or to kind of soothe or talk him out of it. And I just said, wow, that sounds really hard. I mean, boy, if I understand you correctly, you feel like you're the weakest kid in the whole grade. I can understand how upsetting that must feel. There is, and they had this conversation, and rather than sort of getting defensive, he, you know, let his guard and stayed down. And they had a, you know, nice conversation about it. And Mom said part of the value of this wigging is I wasn't quite sure what to say and repeating it back to him. Eventually, you know, I gave him a hug and a kiss and he went to bed. And the really cool part is this. The next morning, he comes down to breakfast with a plan, a written plan, love that, for how he's going to try to gain strength and ask his mom for his help. And for all of us who work with kids where executive functions are hard, and we know that that includes cognitive and emotional flexibility, but also problem solving. It was this incredible experience where through her energy, through her words, calmed his hard emotions and those executive functions came back on. He was able to soothe himself a bit more and figure out solutions for himself. And because we know that brains develop in the ways that they're used, it's a really powerful tool for kids to do that problem solving work, developing those executive functions rather than our being the problem solver for them. And one other quick tool for if you have kids who are easily spun up and you think, how do I calm this? Bill and I are both huge fans of private time with kids. I mean, certainly during COVID, we've all valued family time, but maybe had enough of that. But so often with kids, when we're all together, if you got more than one kid, both of them can feel like they're not getting their fair share of attention. And so there's just real value in finding on a weekly basis, at least an hour one-on-one with kids, because that's when they're much more likely to let their guard down and we really foster this close connection because there's no pesky brother or sister on the left or right.
And if I could just mention too, Ned, that my experience is that the kid you mentioned who comes home and complains about the test and so I studied so hard, and you didn't really. My experience is that when you take the empathy approach that you modeled, that they're more likely to eventually admit, well, I didn't really study enough, and then they have is there a way I can help you kind of thing. And I also love the fact that some of the stuff in our book, it takes, and all this stuff, it takes practice, and you get better at it the more you do it. But this is an illustration that the kid whose mother came to our lecture in Palo Alto, it happened literally overnight. I mean, this change that she changed the energy where she resisted that natural biological inclination to jump in and soothe the kid to solve the problem, and the kid's energy to just with change of energy, the kid stepped up to the plate. It's really very cool. So we start out by talking this in this chapter about communicating with kids that can build that emotional closeness. It's such a protective factor at every age. And then we revisit some of the themes that we talk about in the self-driven child. And the first is this idea of, as kids get older, we want to think about ourselves more as a consultant to them in terms of their boss or manager. And by consultant, I mean somebody whose job it is to help kids figure out who they want to be and what kind of life they want to live and how to create the kind of life they want to live, as opposed to thinking, I know what's best for you. You do this, do this, do this, do this. And there's three implications of this parent as consultant kind of model. And one is that we want to offer help. We want to offer advice to kids, but we don't want to try to force it down their throats. And I think that because I don't want, what I struck early in my career is how many teenagers I'd see who have ADD or LD or anxiety, and they just resisted for years everybody's attempts to help them, everybody's attempts to get them to do their work. And it just seemed what a crappy use of adolescent energy. And I thought, let's just offer, to just say, I want to help you in any way I can, but I'm not trying to force you. And so I think we offer advice. You know, just how the parents, they say, I've told them a million times, or I keep trying to get them to see, there's more skillful ways to communicate. And so then one is simply by offering. And I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the language of this, but it's offering help and advice, not trying to force it. The second is encouraging children to make decisions about things, supporting children in making decisions about their own life, and requiring adolescents, especially older adolescents, to make their own decisions before they go off to college. Because our goal, you know, we see so many kids who go off to college and they're home by November, and they just weren't ready. And in part, they weren't ready because they didn't have enough experience running their own life, solving their own problems, and making their own decisions. You know, they've jumped through hoops. The experience high school is jumping through hoops. And so we want to, as much as possible, encourage kids to make decisions for themselves. And our motto is go with kids' decisions unless they're crazy. I mean, unless almost any sane person would say it's a terrible idea, because we don't really know. You can't predict how something's going to work out necessarily. So ideally, I think the best message you can give to a teenager, besides I love you, is that I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life. And I want you to have and learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of practice doing that before you go off to college, wherever you go off to, because I want you to be able to run your own life. And part of that is being able to make your own decisions. And the third thing is that we want kids to solve their own problems, with support as necessary. But what happens when a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, something stressful happens and they try to deal with it themselves? What happens is the prefrontal cortex activates to figure out what to do. And when the prefrontal cortex activates, it dampens down the stress response. So it becomes less stressful. You go into coping mode as opposed to panic, as opposed to feeling to try to get away or feeling overwhelmed. You go into coping mode. And there's a lot of evidence in both animals and humans that enough experience of dealing with stressful things yourself and develops that confidence that you can actually handle stuff. It develops that, what we call in our book, high stress tolerance, ability to function well under stress, and resilience. So it's these three things. And the beautiful thing is that when your kid comes home, when your kid comes home from school and he's upset, he just failed a test, or his girlfriend dumped him, or didn't make the basketball team, whatever. Remind yourself before you respond, whose problem is it? And if he needs help, offer to help. But ideally, let the kid figure it out. Let the kid know you have confidence that he can figure this out himself. So I will say that I was out in Houston lecturing about the self-driven child about 3 years ago, And I mentioned one of the most elite high schools in the Washington, D.C. area because I just seen a kid from there. And after the lecture, this woman comes up to me and says, we know this. I'm at the Menninger Clinic, which is a really excellent mental health clinic in Houston. She says, we know this independent school in DC really well because so many of the kids get into the most elite colleges, but they can't handle them emotionally. So they take a medical leave of absence and they come here for treatment. And we want kids to be able to kind of figure this stuff out, solve their own problems, make their own decisions, and know when they need help and accept help before they leave home. So the language of a parent consultant includes the language of getting buy-in. But buy-in means rather than it's just listen up, kid, and listen up, good kind of thing. You say, I've got an idea about that. Can I run it by you? Want to hear my advice? I wonder what would happen if you did it this way. Or a phrase I often use is, for whatever it's worth, and then just kind of run it by it. So it's tentative and it doesn't feel forced. And the second aspect of this language of the parent consultant is the language of no force. And it's what we find is it's so empowering if we really make peace with the fact that we can't make kids do things against their will. And so trying to force is not a very good strategy. And what we find is that we let kids know, I'm not going to try to force you, that it changes the energy, and often kids are much more reasonable. I was asked about 3 years ago to talk this 8th grade kid into taking his ADHD medicine. He was diagnosed in the 2nd grade. He's in 8th grade. He's refused to take it for 6 years. His pediatrician met with him the year before and had to come to Jesus kind of meeting. You got to take this medicine. And the kid said, make me. And the mom said, can you talk him into it? And I said, well, I don't believe in talking kids into stuff, but I'll talk to him about it. So he comes in and I say, I want to be clear. I don't want anybody to try to make you take medication. In fact, if your parents try to make it, all you got to do is put it in your cheek, swallow it, and go spit it out. I don't want anybody to try to force you. But I want you to think about it. It makes sense to me for you to make an informed decision. Meaning, I think it makes sense to try it because for a lot of kids, it's like turning on a light bulb. And I'd love to know whether you're one of those kids, and you probably would too. Why don't you try it and see what it does, and then decide whether if it doesn't help you, obviously you don't use it. If you got bad side effects, don't use it. It helps you 10 or 20%. It's not worth it. But if you're one of these light bulb kind of kids, you can decide to use it or not. And the kid decided the next day he wanted to try the medication. Honest to God, this doesn't always happen, as you know. It probably doesn't. Rarely happens. But 2 months later, the mom called me and says he got his low C's up to straight A's. And it was like life changing for this kid. And what it took to get him to try it was reassurance. Nobody's going to force you. This is your life. You're smart enough to make this decision yourself.
But think, Bill, how much of that was the stimulant medication, and how much of it was that they changed the energy that he now had greater autonomy and wasn't
Interesting
using
point.
all
Yeah.
this energy to resist.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Because I'm sure it wasn't the only good advice that the pediatrician had for him. What we talk in The Self-Driven Child about the idea of a non-anxious presence, and the idea behind this, 2 points. One is that systems work better, brains work better when the person or people who are in charge aren't overly emotional or reactive or angry. Because when we do that, we excite the amygdala, the stress response, in people around us. And then those, as bright and talented as they may be, all of that stuff goes sideways because when the amygdala flares, the prefrontal cortex is nowhere to be seen. In addition, when we're talking about allowing kids with all this consultant approach that Bill talked about, when we're allowing them to make their own decisions, even we're like, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, or solve their own problems, like, that would go better if I did that for you, pal. It's hard for us to sit on our hands and button our lips because we know that, as developed parents, we could handle this so much better for our kids, particularly when these things are hard for them. But doing that just kicks the can further down the road. So if we can move in the direction of being more non-anxious, easier for us to sit there and watch and bite our tongue a little bit, even though we're watching our kids struggle. There's some wonderful research by a woman named Jessie Borelli out of UC Irvine who studies parental control, actually parental over control, and a great example of this. She brings these 12, 13-year-old kids into her lab, puts them in front of a computer with a digital puzzle, and bring along parents, I think in this case moms, just for kind of moral support, but with one instruction, which is don't help them, right? Don't tell them how to move things around. Just, you can be there, but, atta girl, atta boy, you're doing it, but nothing more. It's a little bit mean what they do. The puzzle looks easy. Turns out it's not. Kids think, I'm going to nail this. Mom's going to be so proud. Gets a little wobbly. And the more frustrated the kids get, the more distressed they get. And they can tell this because they both have they have a heart rate monitor on. And it goes up and up and up. And kids' distress is, of course, hard for the moms' distress because they're wired to pay attention to their kids' emotion and to want to help. They've been told they're not allowed to help. And their heart rate goes up as well, until eventually all of the moms break the rules, actually the only one rule they have, which is to not help. And they say, sweetheart, no, over to the left, and drive the other way, right? And they just jump in. And finally being able to help, to try to do something to support their kids, feels better. And they can tell because their heart rate comes down. The problem? Their kids keeps going up. Because now the kids feel even less control of it. It's a hard situation and someone else's backseat driving on them. So this is just rooted in science. We're wired to be this way. We're wired to want to help. But if we can move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence, it helps because not only is fear contagious, but all emotions are contagious. Calm is contagious. Turns out that's actually a mantra of the Navy SEALs, and they know a little bit about dealing with stressful situations. So how do we, look at this? How do we pay attention to this? I mean, Bill and I, in lecturing, 27 states and a whole bunch of countries, saw everywhere we looked, there was anxiety, depression, a lot of challenges with stress-related disorders. Either, second graders in Seattle who are in full school refusal, fifth grade boys in Texas overwhelmed by the pressure of these grades, what it means for college, right? And it occurs to us that as much as these things are hard with any one household, it can't be just this parent, this family, this school, whatever, if we're seeing these kind of systems everywhere. And so part of it seems to us that young people are growing up in a world with kind of drip feed of stress. And it's things like, all the constant checking, all the wonderful technology now that allows us to track devices, which short term helps us know kids are safe, but does keep giving messages to them of be afraid, or I'm so worried that I have to know where you are and what your grade is up to the second. And it's obviously very much through our language as well. We're great fans of John and Julie Gottman, who study relationships and have done this for decades. And they find that to kind of keep things, in a glass half full kind of way with relationships, we really need to have, this is challenging, but we want to have 5 to 1 positive to negative interactions, because negative interactions are more powerful and kind of wipe away the goodwill that we have. When we can have more positive, then if I kind of, get cranky or bark at someone at home, my wife or my kids can be like, oh, it's having a bad day. Well, let's give him some space, whatever. Maybe he needs a nap, right? But if I'm consistently doing that or not in that 5 to 1 balance, then it's like, oh, my dad is such a jerk. He's always on the case. That's what it feels like. And it turns out when we looked at language, this was supported by neuroscience because positive words have less impact on the brains. Brains respond in ways that are much more intense than negative words. Just if you're in a functional MRI and you just hear the word no, this cascading effect of stress through the brain. So we want to be very purposeful. So some of the language of a non-anxious presence is saying to things like, wow, it does look hard, but in my experience, things tend to work out okay most of the time, right? Or, if you got a kid who's perfectionistic, the way I see it, you don't have to be the best at everything. You don't even have to be good at everything. You just got to be good enough at stuff that really matters to you. Or, I love you no matter how well you do, or how hard you try. You can't shake that. We might be concerned about, you might be concerned about school, but there's nothing you can do to shake the fact that I love you. And this is saying, I'm with you. We're back to those hard emotions. I'm with you through thick and thin. Right. So often when things aren't going well, with our kids, we feel like we have to keep harping on the performance, right, to somehow fix that. But when we're doing that, we're eroding our relationship. And I'll say I have a daughter who's now a senior in high school, and she had a really rough time of it in 8th grade. She's this really, really, really sharp kid who was not emotionally, socially intuitive, and ended up in full school refusal for 3 months, last 3 months of 8th grade. Now, I'm a guy who helps people get into college. Like, what's my inner narrative? And I just had to remind myself that, she is going to be able to get through this if we do this with support, but we don't, as Bill said before, adversity plus support, that's what becomes resilience. And she needed more of this. And it was easy for me to hold to this idea that things can get better. I mean, so often when things aren't going well, our fears aren't about the present, they're about the future, right? Our kid has, is a C student now, he's going to have a C life. But Bill can certainly tell you, for the thousands or tens of thousands of kids he's seen, usually kids don't stay stuck. They may stuck for now, but it changes over time. My experience was parents were a lot going on, and father's an alcoholic and mother's mentally ill. I spent 3 months of seventh grade in a pediatric psychiatric hospital, which was probably just what I needed. But boy, oh boy, that wasn't the life plan that I was on. But it was, it was a scene from the movie, not the whole movie. And I came back and ended up being really academic in high school and college, and now, do work and hang out with Bill Stixrud and do stuff that's really cool. And so I say that just as a way that it's much easier to help our kids have confidence that even though things are really sucky right now, that this isn't what their life is going to be. If we have our energy, that we also believe that this is just part of their path and it's going to get better. And it's up to the two of us together to figure out how we get there.
Yeah. I just parenthetically, I got a Christmas card last year from a family, and the outside of the card it said, "You were right." And I opened it up, and it's a picture of these three siblings and their spouses, and the card said, "They all turned out great." And these are kids I actually saw in the 1990s into the early 2000s, but I hadn't seen any of them for at least 10 years. And they all had ADHD, learning disabilities, anxiety. One of them flunked out of college twice, or dropped out of college twice because he just couldn't get himself to go to class, couldn't get out of bed. They're all really successful. They're all happily married. And it's just, has happened so much in my 40 years of doing this work that you just never want to give up on a kid. And you just don't, so much, as Ned said, so much, all of our anxiety about our kids, all of our worry about our kids, it's about that somehow they're going to be in this negative place and they aren't going to get better. My experience is if we as parents don't get stuck, it's really unlikely that they're going to stay stuck. And so I love this idea.
Can I add one piece about lowering stress? I mean, certainly COVID has shown us that we think our lives are going well, and then a bomb gets dropped on us, and we get more stress going into our family or our household, and certainly parents who have kids where learning is hard. It's a lot more stress in your life on a day in, day out basis than if you have a kid where learning is really easy. And I don't want to make light of that. What I would say though is that the way that I think about this is if whatever flows of stress you have into your family, your nervous system, need to be balanced by healthy outflows of stress. Otherwise, kind of bad things happen. Some of you may, if you remember me from last time I was here, Debbie, I had a little bit more hair. I shaved my head along with my son, who this summer was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Now he's almost out of the woods, and we've had great care of children, so we're very confident about the outcome. But still, and probably a couple, 3 weeks into this jolly little adventure we've had, my wife turned to me and she said, I've had like 3 people ask, how are you so calm about this? And part of it, Venice and I are really supportive of each other, but also she said, I think it's the meditation. So Bill, the most, equanimous person you'll ever meet in your life, has been practicing transcendental meditation for 47 years. I've been at this for about a decade. My wife picked it up a couple of years ago. She said, honestly, I don't know that I would be responding as well as I think I am if I hadn't learned to meditate. And meditation may not be the tool for everyone, but I think we encourage everyone to give it a try. But if you feel like you're like this all the time with your kids and you want to be more peaceful and you want to move in this direction of a non-anxious presence, it's really a solid idea to explore tools that help you in a healthy way pull stress out of your nervous system, because you're not responsible for what comes in, but no one else is gonna do that for you. And so important to move in that direction.
Excellent point. And I know this family in New York City, and the mom and the son was 17 at the time, and he learned TM and along with the mom. And the mom knew a New York Times reporter and had him come over to write a story about the mom and the son meditating together. And the reporter asked the kid, what do you notice from meditating? He said, TM calms the mind and it calms the mom. It helped her be a more non-anxious presence, he noticed. So we also talk in both of our books about the self-motivation, the self-drive, the title of our first book, The Self-Driven Child. And we talk a little, well, what I would say about it in this context is that we refer in both books to self-determination theory, which we think is the most elegant way of thinking about how to develop that self-motivation. And it holds that to develop that internal intrinsic motivation, you have to have three needs met: for a sense of relatedness, for a sense of competence, and a sense of autonomy. And autonomy is the most important. But what happens in our culture is in every place that we've lectured is that we hammer on the competence, the achievement part so much, often at the expense of relatedness and undermining kids' autonomy. So we really want to be careful about the relationship part that we talked in the first chapter. And while we were working on the book, we saw this report that was published by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, looking at the major causes of stress-related mental health problems in adolescence. And the first four causes were poverty, trauma, discrimination, and excessive pressure to excel. And the idea that we want to minimize the extent to which we're trying to motivate kids through pressure, through fear, ways that make them more anxious. I tested this kid maybe 4 years ago, and he was in 8th grade at a Catholic school, and he had learning disabilities, a language disorder, ADHD. School was really hard for him. And also, 8th grade, he's applying out to Catholic high school. He's just sucking academically. The people in school say it takes 2 learning specialists, a tutor, and the mom on top of him all the time to get him to do any work. And I said, change that energy immediately. Just tell him, I love you too much to fight with you about this. I want to help you in any way I can, but I don't want to take responsibility for what's yours. And then later in the meeting, the principal, who I love, said, I've had 2 talks with this kid already about the importance of him turning this around. Where you go to high school, it's a 4-year decision. He's got to take this seriously. Mm. And I said, respectfully, I'm pretty sure that it's not lost on him that if he does better in school, he'll have more options for high school. I'm also pretty sure that he's tried at various times to do better, and he's found that even if he tries really hard, he doesn't do that great. And what's the point of trying? And I also know that the most common outcome of anxiety by far is avoidance. We tend to avoid the things that make us anxious. And so he's avoiding. He doesn't want to even think about it because it just makes him anxious to think about it. So I said, I think we're going to help him more. We're going to help him find that motivation more. But if we minimize the extent to which the fear and anxiety, tell him, who cares where you go to high school? Nobody's going. When you're 30, is anybody going to care where you went to high school? It's just not that big a deal. It's different. There's all kinds of high schools. And if you want to go to one and you don't get into it, apply as a 9th grader. Do well as a 9th grader, apply for 10th grade. But it's just not that big a deal. I want you to learn how to develop yourself, and I want you to learn how to get as good academic skills as you can. I want you to work hard. But I don't want you to think that somehow, if you can't turn this around the next 6 months, all is lost. It's ridiculous. And I loved it at the school. And they worked at really helping this kid not feel so much pressure, not feel much stress. And the kid actually, it wasn't perfect, but by the end of the year, he was really stepping up to the plate about 50% at least more than he was before. And so that's the main thing about that is that we want to minimize that we're trying to motivate kids by nagging, through fear, through guilt. Fear is a great short-term motivator, but it's a terrible long-term motivator. You just can't sustain it. So when we talk about, when many parents ask me, and Ned too, how do I motivate my kid? What they're really asking in part is, how do I help my kid change? And so in thinking about this, we started looking at the science of change, of what do we know about what the conditions under which people are motivated to change. And so Ned, take over.
Yeah, I'd love to. So this is, there's something called motivational interviewing that was developed by a couple of psychologists who worked with problem drinkers in the 80s, William Miller and Steve Rolnick. And what they stumbled onto was the fact that you can't change people who don't want to be changed, right? And when you try to, when you force, it largely just brings resistance and conflict and avoidance, as Bill talked about. And there are two great insights about this were these. One, that people have a righting reflex. If there's someone we know and love who brings a problem to us, we're inclined, just like Jesse Borelli, to want to jump in and want to try to help. You know, what if you did this, or what if you did that, or to try to talk and change their feelings on it. You know, and so Ned, I mean, you got to give up drinking, right? I mean, your wife's going to leave you, you're going to lose your job. It's terrible for your health. You're going to lose your house. As though giving me one more reason to change my behavior would change my behavior. The challenge is, the other insight of motivational interviewing is that people are ambivalent about change. You go back to that student that Bill talked about. Again, not lost on him, more choices if he got it, if he did better in school, more choices for high school. You know, more likely that his teachers are approving of him, more likely that his parents are more relaxed, more likely that his friends don't think he's a screw up, that they think he's actually got a solid head on his shoulders. But he also knows the other side, that he'd have to study really hard, and maybe say he doesn't like the classes, maybe he doesn't like the teachers and doesn't want to step up for some of them, right? Maybe he has to give up time with his friends or his dog or playing Xbox or whatever else that's just frankly more fun than bloody homework. And he might also work really, really hard and move those not so hot, C's to maybe a B minus. And he might then know exactly what the limit is of his ability. And while he's in denial, he doesn't have to face that. So when people are in a hard place, they're ambivalent, right? They want to change, but they know all the reasons why it can be hard to change. So what motivational interviewing does is sort of helps us resist the urge to argue one side, because that makes people argue the other side and dig in deeper where, on the wrong side of the equation. We use open-ended questions, reflective listening, and then that's the language and silence of change. We wait for change talk. So the story in our book, we have a friend who's a really talented school psychologist. She caught wind of this girl who was smoking a ton of pot, which is not such a good thing to do. And she arranges a conversation with her. First thing she does, as Bill mentioned before, she takes force off the table. I want to be really clear. I'm not going to try to talk you out of smoking pot. I'm sure you've heard it. You're a bright kid. You understand the reasons why, why it may not be what you want to do, at least further on down the line. However, I am interested to understand your perspective. Can you share with me a little bit about what you get out of it? She goes on to talk about how, the kids she hangs out with when she smokes, they're really funny, they're really cool. She feels funnier, she feels cool hanging out with these kids. She's much less relaxed when she's much more relaxed, when she's high, and that's a good thing. Oh, that's terrible, Ned.
We can hear you.
Oh, good. My screen just disappeared. How curious. Well, I'll keep going. Thank you. How much more relaxed she is, but. And so our friend repeats all these things back to her. And so what you're saying is you just kind of like, you like pot because you like the relationship you have with that. That's good. She will, that makes sense. And they kind of go on for a while like this. And eventually the girl then does say, it is kind of expensive though. And she says, oh, well, tell me more about that. And she says, well, I buy a couple times a week. And it uses pretty much all the money that I have. And yeah. And she said, well, question, another open-ended question. If you had more money, what would you spend it on? I'm kind of curious. Well, I'd probably get a pair of shoes. My friend Bill has these really cute shoes, and they're really neat. I'd like to get one of those. And I'd probably get my hair done. I haven't had my hair done in a long while. So that makes sense. And they kind of carry on, and then sort of they part ways. And she sees a girl a couple of weeks later, and she has her hair done. And she kind of makes her way up to her, and she says, oh, your hair looks really cute. Tell me about that. And she says, oh, well, yeah, I only bought one once last week, and I used the money to get like it. Yeah, it does. It looks really cute. And eventually the girl just shared with our friend, the psychologist, that, the kids she was hanging out with, maybe they weren't such a good influence on her in school, because she kind of did want to do well in school. And she got unstuck because the final insight of motivational interviewing is that for me or anyone to articulate for themselves the reasons for themselves to change their behavior, it's so much more powerful and doesn't excite that resistance. It's so much more powerful than when someone else gives us the reasons, in which case we argue against what's in our own best interest.
And it's certainly, it's such a powerful story, Ned, and it's interesting because clearly it's much easier for a school counselor it's not her kid to do this than if you find pot in your kid's room. to not just kind of launch into to lecture, get kids out of here. But if we can seek to understand, I mean, I was talking, I tested a kid last summer, and we were working on this chapter at the time, and this 15-year-old was smoking pot, and I sent a draft copy of this chapter to the mom. I said, you might want to just consider this approach. And so he had the same kind of talk with him. And he said, I'm more relaxed, I'm more fun to be with. I don't worry about all the stuff that's hard for me. And eventually he said, I think I can't practice basketball as much as I need to really to do well next season. And so he actually, in a couple of weeks, he said, he just stopped smoking. And I just think this doesn't always happen. But I think that if we can remember to start by seeking to understand, it's a really powerful thing. So Ned, we've got 11 more minutes, and let's do about 3 or 4 minutes on 3 topics. So, does that sound okay? So, can you hear you, Ned? Can't hear you. So you work on that, but I'll talk a little bit about the other thing we talk about in this chapter on the language and silence of change is this new SPACE program out of Yale. It's an acronym for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. It was developed by Ellie Leibovitz, and I love this. I was trained in. I love this program. And, the idea, and it turns out that this program for dealing with child and adolescent anxiety only works with parents, and it's effective at lowering kids' anxiety as cognitive behavioral therapy is for the kids themselves. And I love it. It starts with the same premise as motivational interviewing, which is you can't change somebody unless they're asking you to change. And the more you try, the more you get pushback and conflict. And so it's based on the premise that because we're mammals, we're wired, as I said earlier, to protect our young and to soothe them. And the challenge is, if we've got anxious kids, that in terms of we tend to protect them oftentimes by making sure they aren't in situations that make them anxious. And when they're upset, we try to soothe them. And if we do that, it helps them in the moment, but it doesn't. But over the long run, it makes them more anxious. And so, what the program involves is 2 things. One is making supportive statements, which are, I know the situation makes you anxious. I know that I know that turning in an assignment that might have a mistake in it makes you anxious, but I'm 100% confident that you can handle it. So you start with empathy, and I understand this, and I'm 100% confident that you can handle whatever anxiety comes up. And then later, it's a matter of saying, I'm happy to proof your work 1 time, but I'm not going to proof it 4 or 5 times. Like that, because that doesn't seem to be helping at all. It's not making you less anxious, and I love this idea that this idea that just recognizes you can't make somebody do something, and if you don't try to change other people, we can be much more skillful. I just love how empowering that is for us as parents. And yeah, talk about the hard ones.
We have a chapter called The Hard Ones, talking with kids about sleep and technology. I see a great question in there about sleep. The long and short of it is that we want to also use this consultant approach, this collaborative approach, because goodness knows you can't make kids fall asleep. Infanthood would have been a whole lot easier if we could have just, and they would have slept through the night, but that's not how it works. Technology is also about as hard as it gets, particularly with kids who have, have attention issues. And it's really a challenge. And our approach on this is that we really, really, really need to be collaborative with kids. We need to change the energy. If we think it's our job to manage our kids' technology, to make them get off the phone, to make them go to sleep, short term, you might win that battle. Long term, it's a disaster, because if you're like most folks, your kids are a few years from heading off to some far from college with your hopes and dreams and a suitcase full of your money. And we need them to struggle with these while we're there to offer help, while we're there to support. There's a wonderful story, I won't go through in the whole thing, about my son who's ADHD, and Fortnite coming through our house like a biblical plague in sophomore year. It was hilarious. I mean, he loved it, but a challenge. And my wife and I really, really walked this. And the story ends up with his asking for us to help him really manage his own use of technology. And I'm, apart from the brain tumor, happy to report that he's doing great, and had just a really, really strong start to college, despite his ADHD, because he had struggled with these things under our own roof. And It was not always easy to watch, but there's scripts and scripts and scripts of kind of the challenges that pop up, what we often say that doesn't work so well, what we can say instead, because these are complicated issues and our kids do need our advice and they do need our support. They do need guardrails, but we want to work to have them feel like we're working with them, not that we're working on them.
And in this chapter, we talk about ways of engaging kids in conversation about do you feel like you get as much sleep as you need? What do you think you're doing? This, like, we use the open-ended questions to try to help, because you can't make a kid fall asleep. And certainly you can set some limits. And we end with the last chapter of the book, and I'll talk about in a minute, is about consequences and limits and that kind of stuff. But ideally, that kids know when they're tired. They know what it feels like to be tired. So we have a lot of scripts in this chapter about talking with kids about sleep and about various aspects of technology, including pornography and social media and that kind of stuff. And then we also, one of my favorite chapters in the book, this What Do You Say? It's called Talking with Kids About the Pursuit of Happiness. And it's rooted in part in a conversation I had 3 or 4 years ago with these high school students who were student government kids at this elite high school in Texas. And I asked the kids, how many of you want to be happy as an adult? And they all kind of sheepishly raised their hand like, duh, you know. And I said, what do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult? And this one kid said, well, we understand that if you get into a good enough college, everything else is set. And the other kids kind of nodded agreement. And I'm going, internally, I'm going, God, how could they be so far wrong? And Ned and I are both fans of Laurie Santos, who is a psychology professor at Yale, who lived for many years, may still, but lived in these residential dormitories with students, and was just struck by these kids who gotten into one of the best universities in the world in terms of achievement. It's like they won the lottery, and they were miserable. She was struck by just how unhappy and just how constantly stressed and too busy they were. And so she started teaching this class on the science of happiness. And it quickly became the most popular course in the history of Yale University. And Ned and I are thinking, what, does it make sense to wait until kids are miserable in college to teach them actually what we know about being happy? And it turns out happiness it's good for everything. Being happy has all kinds of advantages. And it's not that we want kids to have a smiley face all the time, and we don't want to protect kids from stressful situations, because otherwise they don't develop that high stress tolerance and resilience. But we don't want them to be chronically unhappy, and we don't want them to be pursuing happiness in ways that just don't make sense. And so in the chapter, we talk about the difference between happiness and pleasure, and I think being clear about what happiness is versus what gives us pleasure is really helps kids kind of zero in on what to focus on. And so we talk about this model. So Martin Seligman has this model of happiness, the components that make up happiness, and he summarizes it with the acronym PERMA, and it's positive emotion. And there's a lot of things we can do to increase our positive emotion. It's active engagement, or that flow experience of working really hard at building with Legos, or coding, or rock climbing, sports, music, whatever. It's relationships, it's meaning. Doing things it's hard to be happy if what you feel like you're doing isn't meaningful. And so many kids in high school particularly, they just feel like they're just jumping through hoops, not meaningful. And connecting with kids and talking with kids about what brings them meaning, what's important to them, is really beneficial. And the fifth so it's PERMA. And the A is accomplishment or achievement. And again, we think that we way overemphasize the achievement part. It's not trivial at all, but it's not the only. It's only 1/5 of the formula. So, Ned, you want to talk a little bit about the consequences piece?
Yeah, the last chapter in our book is called "What About Consequences?" People say, "Okay, great, this autonomy, I understand, so valuable, motivation, stress tolerance, blah blah blah." But what about consequences? I mean, don't we have to hold kids accountable? And we know that the best model of parenting, authoritative parenting, not laissez-faire authoritarian, where there's high love and there's high discipline. So we take that seriously, but we want to remind ourselves that the etymological root of the word discipline lies not into punish, but into teach. And so we love natural consequences. This is hard for parents to sort of, do one of these and let the world, inform our kids about perhaps the undesirable outcomes of the choice that they've made. And logical consequences have their place, but we got to be thoughtful about them. We want to set them up in advance. We want kids to feel like they're part of this process, because too often logical consequences feel like punishment to kids. And oftentimes, as you know from Ross Green, the kids who get punished the most learn the least from it. And even more complicated, obviously, with kids, you know, who have executive function and ADHD issues or other issues. Well, but you know, I love the line of Jane Nelson says, where do we get the crazy idea that in order to make kids do better, we first have to make them feel worse? And which sort of brings us back to where Bill started, that we wrote this book because we really want to have parents to have the tools to have these close connections with kids, because that's how we're most likely to have influence over them. Power only works as long as they're under our thumb. Influence can be with them forever. And we're so much more likely to influence them in positive ways if we have really strong, open relationships with them. And our book is not sort of agnostic on content, meaning that we don't talk about, you know, what you should tell your kids about sex or race or injustice in the world, all things that are kind of about values in that way, because we're not content experts on talking with kids about sex. We only talk about this as sort of how to have the conversation. What are the tools? Because I'm very confident that everyone on this call has a pretty good idea of the messages that they're important to share with their kids. Where it goes sideways often is in the how. And so this book is really designed to, we kind of anticipated the things that where we see people stumble, where we stumbled ourselves, kind of what we said, why that didn't work out as well as we would have liked, and kind of what to say instead. So that's how we ended up with this title of What Do You Say? Because at the end of the day, nothing can be more painful, well, few things are more painful than being a parent who really is just trying to help their kids, who have great advice to share, and our kids just say, "Dad, you don't understand at all," and they slam the door, and now they're upset with us, we're upset for them, we're upset with them for being upset with us, and no one's getting helped, even though we're so well-intentioned. All we really want to do is help.
Hey, Ned, can I take 60 seconds and tell that amnesty story?
Sure.
Well, we were working on this last chapter. As we were finishing the last chapter, I'm taking a walk with one of my childhood friends who's in Arlington, and he tells me the story. He never told me before. He had 4 kids, and the second to the youngest was a real spitfire who is in high school, was constantly testing limits, breaking rules, lying about it. And he said, we just had such a dysfunctional relationship with both parents did with this girl. And one weekend, the mother is away. The dad has a meeting on a Friday night, and the girl invites 20 kids over her house for a drinking party. Neighbor calls my friend at his meeting and said, you know, your daughter's got 20 kids over there. They're drinking your house. So he finishes the meeting. He goes home, and somehow the kids got wind of it, and they cleared out. And he confronts his daughter, and she says, we didn't have a party. So are you saying John across the street is lying? Yeah, he must be, because we didn't have a party. And so my friend called John's wife, who's a therapist, and said, what should I do? And she said, give her amnesty. Tell her that whatever happened tonight didn't happen. There's no consequences. No, she has complete amnesty. And so he says that. What he says is that if I were lying straight face to my parents, I'd probably feel a little guilty about it. So I don't want to pile on. But you have amnesty. And he said a couple hours later, she comes into his bedroom and says, Dad, I did have a party. I'm sorry I lied. He said the temperature in our household went up 30 degrees. And the point is that we never, it's not that we never set limits. It's that we don't want to get into kind of this kind of punishing, scolding, limiting, to the point where it just damages our relationship. And just remember that relationship is the most important part. So, Debbie, have to take questions?
Love that story.
Yes, I know. I'm back. Thank you guys so much. We have obviously a lot of great comments here. For those of you who have been asking, we are recording this. We will send the link out as soon as we finish. I know we only have a few minutes left, but if you guys want to stick on for a couple extra minutes, and I know
Sure.
anyone who wants to log off at the top of the hour. But I'm going to start with Michelle's question. Because there were a couple of these. Is there any momentum in the US for recognizing PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance? Many of the strategies you shared sound like they could work when looking at kids from that perspective.
Yes, pathological demand avoidance is it's not a diagnosis, but in England, it originated in England, and it's describing a subset of kids with autism who have who just even stuff they don't want to do, they want to do if they feel demanded, they won't do it. And there's very little interest in it. I mean, there's a lot of grassroots into it. There's a woman in my office who's in the Stixrud group, who's Donna Henderson, who's a real expert on it. And there's people around the country who think this is really helpful. I myself have never seen a kid, my 35 years, who actually meets all the criteria, but Donna sees several, and I think that, and it's interesting because I just talked with Donna about this, and most of the top researchers in the U.S. aren't interested in it, but there's just so far. But the techniques for dealing with PDA tend to be they're very similar because they start out, I'm not going to try to force you. Nobody's going to make you.
Thank you for that. So here's another question, and there seemed to be, again, a lot of interest in this. Basically, it's really about a 15-year-old ADHD 2E who has been struggling to handle a workload, and the biggest struggle, and this was the emphasis that we saw a lot of questions on, is get him to bed early enough so that he's going to have a better next day, because obviously there's a lot of challenges. I had the same issue last night. For any other moms that had that big mini-mester project due today, there were a lot of late nights. So the question is, how do I handle this situation about trying to get kids who are staying up late to finish homework that's due the next day to bed?
Do you want to start, Ned, or you want me to?
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, well, I think that a lot of my clients, I say, what if you're working past 9:30, you're working at about 5% mental efficiency. Why don't you, if you got stuff to do, why don't you go to bed, at 10 and get up an hour early, because you'll be able to get whatever you had to do, you'll be able to do it about 2 or 3 times faster. So that for some kids, just they'll buy into that. And we take the same kind of respectful approach. We do collaborative problem solving. We say, I know that you and I respect so much the fact that you want to do well. You're willing to stay up late. And I also know with ADHD, it's hard because you can't take your medicine late at night, and I get that. And but I wonder if we could talk about ways that you could get some more sleep, because you'll be able to do it faster and easier. Where it's not trying to are consistently imposing limits on adolescents, because that does, over time, that doesn't work at all. But it's helping them realize. I mean, when my daughter was 10 years old, I said, honey, it's the time for bed, and she said, I'm not tired. And I said, well, it's bedtime. It's good to be on a consistent bedtime. She said, I'm not tired. And I said, well, I'm going to go to bed. You know what it feels like to be tired the next morning. So I assumed that you'll, if you're tired tomorrow, you could go to bed at 10 tomorrow night, or whatever it was. And she did. And she went to bed at 10:30 every night in high school. I never had to talk about her ever. Now, she's a pretty well-regulated kid. But I am saying that I think you can't make a kid sleep. And I think that if we take this respectful, let's try to figure this out together kind of approach, it's really beneficial. Did we lose Ned?
And I think his battery died, and he's going to try to get back on his phone.
Okay.
But there's a follow-up question about how long do you, trying to give the autonomy, trying to choose your own bedtime, but how long does this go on? Because he's cranky as heck and overwhelmed and overtired. How long do you let this go on, making their own decisions, but knowing that there's a harm that is happening?
So in both our books, the approach we take is that we don't want to do power plays with kids and use force with kids unless they just can't think straight. And so kids who are really depressed or suicidal, or they're drug involved, we put them in a program whether they want to or not. Or kids who are just in complete denial. I see kids who they're flunking every class. I'm doing fine. That if they can't think straight and they won't let other people try to help them, then I think that we can try to impose some martial law, but that doesn't go easily as well. And I do think that most kids, if we do what I say, one of the things I suggest is say, why don't we go for a week, you kind of running it the way you think is best, and then let's go for a week where you go to bed earlier and get up early if you need to, like that. And just see how it goes. I mean, you're smart enough to kind of know. That kind of approach works well. And I also think, but so many of the adults that I know don't sleep that well. And we suggest make getting enough rest a family problem. In the same way that we encourage parents to play video games with kids and get to know a lot about the technology the kids are using in a respectful way, because then it's easier to help them to figure out how to limit it than if our energy is constantly no, 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 no. And we don't, if we told a kid once or twice that you ought to go to bed, so you got so go rested, and they haven't responded, we want to kind of zip our lip until we figure out what to do next. Because we don't, you don't want to fight about the same thing over and over again. You don't want to tell the kid the same thing over and over again. You could also put it in writing. You could also, so a lot of kids, it helps just to write a little note, send them a text, send them an email that just says, I love you more than anything. And I know that sleep is so important for your brain, is so important to doing well. And I know you don't want to be tired all the time. And if there's a way that I could help, please let me know.
If I can add to it really quickly, sorry, I'm having technology issues over here. The other thing that I think often the trap that we can fall into is trying to change that behavior, give those messages late at night when not only are kids tired, we're tired. And it's, I mean, I can remember watching my son struggling in high school, up way too late and thinking this is going to be a disaster and thinking, you got to get this done now so you can get in bed. But it ends up being this controlling energy, this controlling behavior. And, that is not the time to have your kid hear this, because you think, what am I supposed to do? I have to do this, right? And you're telling me I have to go to bed, and then they're back to being stuck. I remember when we were last visiting you, Debbie, about our first book, there was a really thoughtful question from a parent about a kid who was kind of super driven about grades. And, mom was saying, we're trying to tell it, like, it's not that big a deal. You don't have to be perfect. There are all these choices. And the girl just fought the other side. I then started mistakenly trying to give mom more ammunition of the statistics to change this kid's thinking about college. But of course, this was really rooted in the girl's, her motivation, but also her fear. And Bill sort of popped in. He said, you might try something like, it must feel pretty scary to feel like you have to be perfect all the time and your grades have to be the best. And that's the kind of thing that gets people unstuck. So, with your kids, we can be, terrified, like, you got to go to bed. This is disaster for your performance, your mental health, and everything. It must be really hard to feel like you have to stay up all night, studying like crazy, to do as well as you want to be. Wow. And that's when it's going to be the waterworks. You have no idea how hard this is. And that's when you're likely to get that buy-in. And the second thing, I love the note, Bill, by the way. The other thing is you get not having this conversation 11 o'clock at night, but maybe on a Friday and say, gosh, I noticed that you sure seem so tired this week, and I was too. Can we maybe talk about this on Sunday? I'm just wondering if there's something we haven't thought about yet. And the last thing is, a lot of times parents feel like they need to stay up with their kids. I would tell my kid, like at 9, I go to bed pretty early. I tell my kid 9:30, so I get about 45 minutes and then I'm going to bed. Anything I can help you with before I go to bed, because I knew that I could help him more. I could be more that non-anxious presence if I wasn't sinking in a boat of sleep deprivation right along with him.
Great, thank you guys. So we do have a lot of questions. We'll probably go till 10:15 if that's okay. So Diane had asked a question about, when I'm doing this reflective listening, sometimes I feel that my teens think I'm trying to lead them into a trap, but I'm really trying to get to the root. How do I get to the root anxiety that for a teen that really avoids and procrastinates? That was
you say
the first question.
What I get is it feels like you think I'm trying to lead you into a trap. It can be an endless loop like that. But our main thing perhaps is we want to treat kids respectfully, and I think that if kids sense that they have some kind of ulterior motive, I just think it's when you're in a good mood, when he's in a good mood, you're in the car together sometime, just kind of offhandedly say, I just want to let you know when I'm doing the best I can to listen to you, I don't have any ulterior motives. I'm not trying. I don't think I can change you. I don't know what I told my high school kids. My kids were in high school. I don't know what's best for you. I mean, I don't, because I don't know who you want to be. And one of the beautiful things about raising adolescents, somebody pointed out to me years ago, was that every day when they come home from school, you get to see who they're deciding to be. And so, Ned, do you want to add on? Can't hear you.
Oh, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Sorry, folks, I've got 4% battery life, so I'm looking for another computer. Executive functions. If your kid says, "Why are you repeating it back?" You just simply, I'm trying to, I'm trying to make sure that I understand you. Or if it's a new technique, that I realize that the ways that I've been trying to communicate in the past, I don't feel like I'm as effective. I feel like I'm nagging you all the time. Not you feel like I'm nagging you. I feel like I'm nagging you, and I'm trying a different way, because I want to be, I want to be respectful. I want to be effective. I want to make sure that I understand you. And so you'd be really honest about it. The other thing we talk about in the book is the real power of apologies. That when people, the only perfect parents are people who don't have kids yet, right? I mean, because the only people who haven't made a mistake. And so there's just real power of apologizing when we fall short, because we are going to fall short. And it's also modeling for kids a tool for them when they make mistakes, because they will.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is that this, I mean, there's a really, one of the most popular kinds of marital therapy uses the same technique, where instead of arguing, you're required to listen to what your partner says, respectfully summarize what you understood they just said, and it goes on from there. And so model it with your spouse, model it with other kids, so the kid sees it's not just him you're trying to somehow have some ulterior motive to change it.
So, thank you. And I think that answers one of the questions that people were talking about with spouses. How do you make sure that the spouses are on the same page? I mean, it does a lot of times understanding what's going on underneath what they're actually saying, which is what you're really talking about. The other thing I really have been wanting to say that I feel like I've learned over a long period of time is that Dr. Stixrud, what you said about the long run, like the Christmas card you got with the kids that turned out okay. These are not quick fixes. We just really have to understand that, the getting them to bed and, finding that motivation, these are not things that happen quickly, even if we do reflective listening, right? So that there's another thing that we have to remember.
Ned's heard me say many times that the most useful thing I've ever learned about the brain was in 1992, the first study that came out that showed how rapidly the brain was still developing in early adolescence. And my own kid, who had some attention executive function problems, I saw dramatic changes between 22 and 26, dramatic. And so it's just, you see this again and again. And I was at a wedding. One of my friend's kids got married maybe 5 years ago. And one of my friends came up to me and said, "I'm so glad that you told me about how that slow maturation of the prefrontal cortex, because my kid was a hot mess and now he's doing great." And by the end, after 10 minutes later, 4 other of my friends had come up and said exactly the same thing, that they all had kids with ADHD, and just knowing that nature, that biology is going to really improve things a lot. There's a story in the book about a 23-year-old with ADHD and a lot of anxiety, who was smoking pot all day, going to bed at 4 in the morning, getting up at noon, smoking pot and playing video games the whole day. And he's this probably 6-7 years later, he's a successful attorney, a successful engineer. He's married, has a child. And the only thing, the mom said, the only thing he's trying to work out is kind of forgiving himself for all the failure he experienced and everything he put his parents through. And I said, if they work on letting him know that they completely forgive him. They're so proud of him. But at 23, I wasn't optimistic. But so it's just, there's never reason to panic or to give up hope.
Yep, my son's therapist thought he would never make it outside of the house, and he's on the dean's list at third year of college. So I'm going to actually end with a question I think may be helpful for everybody here, which is Leah had asked a question that I'm going to rephrase a little bit. So if I feel like I'm not doing it well now, and maybe the relationship I have with my child, is her question, isn't as close as I really would like it to be, what's the best way, I'll end with each of you, that you guys might have for parents to reconnect?
Well, I'll throw this out. This is sort of a tangential to this, because we get this a lot. I try to talk to my kid and they won't open up. we want to remind ourselves that kids, it's helpful to them psychologically to know that they have our support, even if they don't take it. Okay? So again, my daughter, her communication style when she's upset is to be very dark and to say nothing. And so oftentimes, sweetheart, are you okay? You look upset. Anything I can help with? Okay. Is there something that I can do or that I did? Well, it sure looks like you're pretty upset. So then I'll say, gosh, it's clear to me you're pretty upset, but I also don't want to pry. If there's a way that I can help you, I'd love it if you let me know. And is it okay if I circle back in about a half an hour? And she's a senior in high school. I'm trying to balance my support for her and her need for autonomy and solving these things for herself as much as she can. And I swear, I have done this. I've been doing this for the last year, and every time it happens, I say, well, I'm going to go downstairs. I'll check back. If I say I'll come back in half an hour, 10 minutes later, she's downstairs bouncing on whatever. And whatever problem is, I've never found out what it was that was bothering her. But it's my way of letting her know, I'm here for you. I respect your autonomy, but I see you. I recognize, I'm paying attention to the fact that you're in pain, and that's important to me. But I'm going to respect boundaries. And again, just knowing that you have support, even if you don't get the support, is really powerful in relationships.
I'll add that having a close relationship doesn't mean that your kids confide with, as Ned said, they don't necessarily confide about everything. When my kids were in high school, they bring some problems to me, but the others they wouldn't. And I'd say, "Do you got somebody to talk to about this?" And I talk about with my sex ed teacher, my coach or something. Then I would say, okay, so as long as you have somebody to talk to about that's cool. And also, I mean, the best times for many parents to kind of connect with kids is late at night. I mean, I'm not talking about 2 a.m, but I'm talking about, I remember with my own kids, when I'd drive them home from a baseball or softball game or a practice, and it'd be dark, and they're in the backseat of the car, and they're a little tired, so their inhibitory control is down a little bit. They're just much more likely to open up. But with younger kids, just going and sit on their bed and talking a little bit. And the other thing I'd recommend is that one of the ways that we can kind of prime the pump is to just share our own emotions. Just to tell our kids, that I had something today that I feel kind of funny about. Kind of run about. Can I share it with you, like that? And just I'd love your feedback about this. I'd love your take about it. And just being clear, it's not that you're saying I want you to solve my problem. It's that I respect you enough to can I run this by you. But just often just modeling for kids how you open up, how you do that it's safe to do that, can help as well.
Well, that's, I think, incredibly useful, and I think it reminds all of us as parents why when we go to lay down at night with even our younger kids, of course, why it's the time that everything comes out, right? It's so true.
Right.
Well, I can't tell you the number of thanks we have, and thank you so much for giving us this extra 15 minutes. And I know Ned was having his computer, but it looks like it lasted till the very last minute.
Well,
so,
yes, and I apologize. I thought we went to 10:30, so I apologize that we didn't get the questions earlier. But
no, it's okay. Thanks for staying a little bit later. We appreciate it. And
Debbie, can I add that Ned and I have a closed Facebook group that you can sign up for. It's the self-driven.
Yeah.
If you Google self-driven child, the Facebook will come up, and we were taking more questions tomorrow at 3:30.
Great. That was one of the questions. So I will make sure, that was Jen's question. Is there social media you can follow? So I will make sure that we send that out with the link, with the recording. And it was really excellent. You gave me a line that I'm going to use today with my college son who just came home. So I really appreciate it. And
which is it?
The thanks are rolling in. It was really about the stress and anxiety and the proofreading of the work, and just, the whole idea of really helping him manage his stress and anxiety. So I thought that was really
this message, I have confidence, because we used to think that I don't want you to be anxious, but the message, I have confidence you can handle it. It's a really beautiful message.
Yeah, because he has proven he can, and it's just that same cycle over and over again, right? I really appreciate it. Well, we are so grateful to you, and thank you to everyone in the community. We'll send out our next webinar for January. Oh, just in time for Ned to come back but I think we're going to go ahead and sign off. Oops, we're just signing off. Right. We're signing off, Ned. We're good. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Thanks, folks.
Weekend all.
Bye-bye.